I personally felt stifled in the hospital environment. So I actually sought to get out as quickly as I could.
Yeah, a lot of material possessions don't necessarily equate to happiness.
I am a single mum and I've got 2 kids, and I worry so much about something happening to me. I then started playing catch up. I had this big FOMO and I played catch up. And 10 years on, I now own more than 10 properties, probably
Yeah.
around $20 million.
Hello, everyone, and welcome again to another episode of Passive Income Doctor. Today, we have an interview with a special guest, Dr. Anna Pham, a GP, a practice owner, and property investor, and so much more. Welcome, Anna, to the show.
Thank you for having me, Dan.
Let's start. Tell us about your professional background and what your day-to-day life looks like.
Okay, so I'm a full-time GP in Picton, which is in regional New South Wales, and I've been here since 2006. And we're about to open our second medical hub in Norella, New South Wales, which is in southwest Sydney. I'm a single mum. My kids, I've got 2 kids. Lachlan is almost 18 years old and doing his HSC this year. And my daughter Amelia is almost 16.
So I guess going back in time, what was discussion around money like when you were growing up, from childhood, and how has it influenced, kind of your mindset around money, investing, work ethic, now?
I am a refugee, as is the rest of my family from Vietnam. And so we pretty much came to Australia with nothing. I myself arrived in Australia roughly in around November 1983. So basically, we started with pooling resources together and living together with extended families and friends so that money could go a little bit further. I watched my parents work double shifts and overtime and on weekends. We lived very simply. There were never any holidays, not even camping. We took care of ourselves after school until mum and dad came home from work. So it was expected that we would have done our homework and showered by the time they got home at 6 or 7. They would have dinner together. And then the only show that we would be allowed to watch, which I suppose was considered family time, was Sell the Century with Tony Barber. I don't know if you ever watched that, Dan. And that was pretty much my life growing up. We never spoke much about money, except for, perhaps the idea, or not so much an idea. Asian parents aren't coy in telling us that we needed to study hard to get a good job, to have a better income and have a better life for ourselves and for our children than they were able to offer us. So that was my childhood.
Yeah, definitely. I think, a lot of immigrant families impart the importance of, working hard, education, as a way to try and get ahead.
Yes, that's right.
And I guess this leads us to the next question. So what was medical school like, and also your junior doctor years like?
Very hard for me. I always thought that because I was quite good in the debating team, I was always third speaker, I brought the argument home. I thought that I'd be an advocate for people by being a lawyer. And it wasn't until I did work experience with a barrister in the city that I realised that although I wanted to advocate for people, I didn't want to just advocate for people who could afford to pay for my services, especially if it didn't align with my values, i.e. the case didn't. A particular case that came to mind was he was defending a rape case as an example. And I just couldn't see myself being able to do something like that. So that's why in year 11 and 12, I then diverted my attention towards medicine. I still remember going to the careers advisor saying, I don't know anyone who is a doctor. I don't know anything about the pathway to get into med school. What should I do? How can I get more information? I remember her advice to me was, have you thought about being an occupational therapist? And I remember saying, no, I don't even know what that is, but can you please tell me what I need to do to get into medicine? We were all very naive. We didn't know about selective schools. We didn't know about private schools, not that we could afford it. We didn't know about tuition. I don't think we could have afforded much. So I just studied really hard. I'm not naturally very smart nor very academic, but I have a very strong work ethic. So I studied really hard. And in year 12, I think we did manage to get me some tuition for chemistry and math, the things that I was struggling with. And I just studied really hard and got into med school. But coming from Southwest Sydney and traveling to Randwick or Kensington, where University of New South Wales was a 3-hour journey return, and it's tiring. It's really tiring. Having to do that for 5 out of 7 days was really tiring. So I physically struggled and I mentally struggled, but I managed to get through. The junior years were a bit easier in that I managed to get into Liverpool Hospital, so it's close to home. So I gained all that free time back. But hospital's not my thing, Dan. Why I chose GP was because I knew very early on that that hospital was not for me. It felt institutional for me. It felt very hierarchical. It felt inflexible. And I personally felt stifled in the hospital environment. So I actually sought to get out as quickly as I could. And I saw GP as being able to give me that freedom, that sense of escape from the institution. And I felt, rightfully or wrongfully, that GP could give me more opportunities to grow, not just clinically, but in business. And really, the business then later allowed me to expand into investing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I think you've touched on a lot of reasons why people choose general practice as a career. And yeah, we'll talk about GP and clinic ownership as well. So can you tell us then, when about your investing journey, like when did you start maybe being interested in it, learning in it, and when did you start investing and growing your property portfolio?
Yeah, I wish I could tell everyone just how smart I was and how many courses I attended and just how much due diligence I did in my early days. But really, I was a real novice. So my first home was the family home after I got married. So I was an RMO 1 or RMO 2 at the time, and we bought our first property in Wentworthville. Thereafter, on our RMO income, we would acquire 1 property per year, and we did that for until we got to around 5-ish properties together, and then we got divorced, and after the divorce I was left with around 2, I'd say. And then after a 4-year hiatus post life change, I then started playing catch up. I had this big FOMO and I played catch up, and 10 years on I now own more than 10 properties. And it's a combination of both residential and commercial. Yeah, so that's where I am. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. And what was the initial drive as a maybe late medical student or as a, junior doctor? Like what was the so yeah, you got your family home, which I think a lot of people start with. What was the drive to say, look, maybe we invest in shares or maybe we invest in property? Like what was the initial drive to invest?
I think just property was something that I could understand. I didn't understand shares and stock market at all back in the days, whereas property was so much easier. Just like everyone else, it's something you can see, you can feel, you can touch, you can crunch the numbers. And it was just something that I could understand more, whereas I found the shares to be another language, a foreign language that I didn't understand. And there was no one to ask. Yeah.
I was just curious, like obviously I started investing after the 2017 tightening of lending. What was
Yes.
lending back in the day like? Was there debt to income ratios? Did
Oh, it
you go
was
to a
amazing
banker
back in the
and
day.
yeah?
Yeah. So because the first one wasn't me, while we acquired our first property on, I think it was 80% LVR with LMI, because the 90 to 95% without LMI hadn't kicked in yet. We did get 80, but lending was still relaxed after that, because after that initial one and our income slowly rose from intern year and RMO 1 year, I kid you not, I would experience the changes in lending year by year because I was buying year by year. So we'd go from 80% with LMI to having one banker tell me that we could only borrow like 400,000, to me then calling another lender that worked with doctors only and saying, I kid you not, from 400,000, I said to this lender, because I was a bit cheesed, I said, listen, I've seen this Riverview home on so-and-so suburb, and they're asking for 1.5 to 1.8 million. I'm not quite sure. I'll still be negotiating, but that's the rough figure that they're looking at. What's my ability or our ability to borrow that kind of figure? On the phone, he said, "Yep, Anna, no problem." It's
Wow.
like, are you
And
serious?
this is like 15 years ago or so?
Yeah, so this would be around 15 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah, wow.
So that was that. And then, acquiring the properties was easy. A bit of paperwork, I always used a broker, a bit of paperwork and a signature here and there, and you got your loan. It never seemed like hard work. But then in, what was it, 1997?
Oh,
2000,
2017, the
2017, yeah.
APRA, tightening, interest
Yeah,
only and other
that's
things. Yeah.
it. So 2017. I had a property that had just settled right before the APRA lending tightening occurred, and one property that settled right afterwards. The one that occurred beforehand was that simple piece of paper, sign it, got the loan, easy, didn't have to think much about it. Oh, overnight, literally overnight, it was so much paperwork, so much explanation that I needed to do about my lifestyle and my spending and all of those things. It was night and day. That was a bit of a shock to the system. But yeah, that has changed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And were them, I heard brokers is more of a proliferation maybe in the last 5, 10 years. So even at the start of your journey, say 15-ish years ago, you used a broker from the beginning or?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What
Yeah.
made you,
I always
was it one of those conferences where they approach you or word of, like, how did you find a broker back in the day?
Oh, I remember I used to just, in the early days, reach out to the banks themselves, and then I'd get a mobile lender come out,
Uh,
and those mobile lenders didn't get me very much. So I then, and that broker that I happened to call on the phone, all doctors know about them because they were very medical specific.
I think I know.
Because the experience was so vastly different, yeah, I then kind of anchored the idea that a broker would do all the work and get me a better loan than I could via a bank, and especially a mobile one or a green one. So I've just always, yeah, from that experience, I've always used a broker, and they've always made my life so easy because they're doing all the grunt work behind the scenes. I didn't see the need to not use one.
Yeah. And with
Although
your,
the idea of outgrowing, Dan, I don't know whether you've got experience of this, but you can outgrow your broker. And that's been another experience that I've had as well.
yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. I think I've changed broker a few times, accountants a few times.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So I understand. So at the moment, yeah, good on you. In the last, 10 years or so, grown to 10 property portfolio. So how many of that's residential? How many of that's commercial? And if you're happy to share, like, numbers and LVR as well.
Oh, half. Half resi, half commercial.
Yeah. And as I said, if you're happy to share,
Yeah, I'm
what
happy
about
to share.
how big is the portfolio and LVR and
How big is
oh,
in the
the
value
yeah, market value of the property
of
and
my property portfolio at a
yeah,
rough guess? Probably
yeah,
around $20 million.
yeah,
Yeah, my LVR is under 50%.
yeah, nice, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, I heard you on one of the other podcasts. Was it you have philosophy of, is it principal and interest? You like principal interest rather than interest
Yeah.
only, or?
Yes, where possible, I'll force myself to pay P&I so that I'm chipping down on the loan. Yeah, that's not to say that I don't have things that's interest only. There have been residential properties where I know I'm not going to sell it. I know I'm not going to make much from it. Looking back, I don't even know why I bought it, but that's another story. And so all the circumstances were that I was, feeling vulnerable and I wanted to be risk averse. So a few of them, I put them on interest only.
Yeah.
And when the interest rates were really low during COVID, then I fixed a few on that 2%. But outside of those unique circumstances, whether it's personal or economic, I do P&I.
Yeah.
Variable. So my go-to is usually variable P&I.
Yeah. And for our listeners, this is not financial advice, but it's interesting hearing different perspectives. Yeah, obviously interest only, you kind of have that better cash flow, but yes, principal and interest, you often get at the moment, you get a better interest rate, and I guess you're building up equity as well because you're
Yeah.
paying down
So
the debt.
I suppose I've always wanted to. Okay. So one of my philosophy is that I plan in 10 years time frame, Dan. So I'll find myself on average, I'll just call it 10 years. Sometimes I'll achieve it in 8, but I give myself 10 years to give myself a couple of years leeway and a couple of years of curveballs that's unexpected, personal or financial or economic or otherwise. But roughly in 10 years, what I find this happens to me. I will get myself into debt, good debt, like financial, investing debt, and then I'll aim to clear it in 10 years.
Wow.
Right. So I aim to clear it in 10 years. So I have to do little things to be able to clear it, including paying P&I, because if I pay interest only, I'm not going to be able to clear it. Right. And sometimes it's not that I clear every single debt, but I tend to clear the big ones, the big substantial ones. Right. And then the little resi ones with, a couple of $100,000 in it don't really matter. So I clear it, but I literally clear it within that 10 years. I don't give myself a 6-month hiatus. It happens that after 6 months of feeling that financial freedom and that breathability, and that drop in anxiety, I then get bored. And then I find myself borrowing again, but this time I end up borrowing even more than what I did 10 years prior, because I've now, embarking on a project that's bigger and more sophisticated than 10 years ago. And then I go through this journey of uncertainty and anxiety for a while, and then I just plow through it and aim to clear it off in the next 10 years. So so that's how I work. My time frame is over 10 years. My cycle is over 10 years. And I kind of adjust to the little fluctuations over those years, and I don't allow myself to be too perturbed by it, because I've given myself that horizon to achieve things.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. And yeah, I can imagine, if you pay down debt, that could reduce some anxiety. Just curious, do you think once you pay down, as is that maybe not all, but majority of debt, do you get bored, or do you kind of get anxious about all this cash that, hey, I should be investing this money, I should be putting it to greater use? Is that why you then, go hard again and grow your portfolio again?
It's funny. Mindset's a funny thing, right? It's so important, and it's you don't realize how important it is until you're older, wise, and you reflect back on it. I think a lot of my behavior in investing has been governed by the fact that I am a single mum and I've got 2 kids, and I worry so much about something happening to me and leaving 2 kids vulnerable to their mother's debts. So I think that was the driver for me to try and clear things. So if something untoward did occur, they weren't going to be burdened by my bad decisions. Because interestingly enough, now that they are, mini adults, so to speak, and I can see that they're grounded and I can see that they've got good foundations, I almost feel like I can spend the next decade taking on more risks, because it doesn't matter what happens to me. It doesn't matter if I leave them with nothing, because everything has to be sold to pay off the debts. They're going to be okay. My legacy is that I've taught them to be good human beings of good character, with good financial sense. They know how to save. They've heard me talk about investing. They're going to be okay. And I think based on that, as I get older, you might see me actually taking on more risks, because I feel that I'm freer with less responsibility towards the little children. So I've got now the liberty in my mind to be able to take on more risks.
Yeah, definitely. What came to my mind was, education is priceless. You can, inherit money and all that, but if you don't have the mindset and the skills and the work ethic and, investing acumen, you could easily lose that money. And, I think I don't have kids yet, but I think these kind of skills and education and imparting on them is very important. And I guess, that is a good point as well. As your kids, grow up and then enter towards adulthood, I guess, you might feel, as opposed to when they're toddlers and helpless and they depend on you for everything. I guess maybe as they grow up, you feel, now you've got more freedom or confidence to invest. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
And I'm just curious about, so I assume you started off with residential and then later transitioned to commercial. Was there a tipping point where you decided to transition to commercial? I know commercial is like all the rage at the moment. A lot of commercial buyers agents have popped up. A lot of people on the online forums talking about how it's almost like a magic bullet. And I've looked into it myself. Would you have any maybe not so much tips, but a mindset about, when an investor should transition from, say, residential to commercial, pros and cons and things like that?
Yeah, okay. So my transition to commercial was very early, and I suppose made easy by the fact that the first two that I purchased myself without the use of a buyer's agent, were pretty much in my backyard, in that it was in Southwest Sydney, and I was aware that the zoning was changed. So zoning in Narellan had gone from residential to business and mixed use. And in that environment, I went in and purchased 2 residential properties in a newly zoned area. And I had in mind of converting those into a medical facility. Granted, I won't go into the story right now, but it did take me 10 years to achieve that aim. But that was my first foray into buying 2 commercial properties. And so they were gems. Later on, commercial property acquisition was through a buyer's agent. So I've got an industrial warehouse, which is a little beauty in Queensland, because although it's one title, it's got 2 tenancies. So right now it's tenanted by the same tenant in both shops. But if one was to left, I could still rent out the other quite easily.
Is that one in Brisbane or in regional Queensland?
Brisbane.
Brisbane, wow. Yeah.
So that one was in Brisbane. And then same buyer's agency, shout out to the Steve Cleese team, they bought me both of them, is one in Perth. So now that's retail. He's actually featured that particular one on his website and on his Facebook sites a couple of times. So it's in Perth, and the tenant is an Italian restaurant, family owned, and they've been tenants there for 20 years now. It's within a shopping complex right next door to Hoyt Cinema, and the returns are great. I suppose, where I am now, I would only buy either commercial or residential that will give me both capital growth and cash flow. Like, I can't just have one and not the other. If I compromise, it'll be a compromise on a little bit of capital growth for a really good commercial, or compromise a little bit of cash flow for really good capital growth. But it's not going to be a huge difference in that compromise, if you know what I mean. So in my early days, so to explain in context, my early days, my residential properties have got capital growth, but really shitty gains. So while paying P&I, and they, and I always started with them being neutrally geared or very minimally negatively geared, or even positively geared now, I'm only making like $5,000 from each property, right? That's nothing. Those properties ought to be leveraged better. I ought to be drawing on the equity and doing something with it, but I haven't. So I think in my next phase, I have so many properties with so much equity that I ought to take a bit of risk, do something with that, and buy a really blue chip property. And by blue chip, I mean, if you heard me on other podcasts, I talk about my beautiful cliff top, my shitty shack cliff top in Malua Bay, where no one wanted that property because it does look so shitty. And we use it, for the family to holiday in only, but there are plans in place in DA to demolish it and to build 4-bedroom duplexes on both sides. And I think I'm going to get really good returns on it. And being cliff top, the capital growth will be phenomenal in 10 years' time. So that's what I mean by I'll buy blue chip things either commercial or residential that will give me both capital growth and yield. I'm not going to compromise on one for another.
When did you buy the Queensland warehouse and the Perth retail one?
I bought that during COVID.
Oh, both
So
during 2020.
both
Yeah,
during,
wow. Nice.
2021, 22, something like that.
Yeah.
23, I can't remember.
Yeah.
I remember Manzuro, the accountant and the other co-founder of Lifecycle Projects Investing for Doctors. I remember him saying, look, the banks are going to start tightening up their lending. So I need you to start thinking about your finances and getting your finances in order and getting your cash in place, because lending is going to be really hard in the next 6 to 12 months. So that meant counting up all the cash that I had, working out how much equity I had, going to the banks to say, you know, how much can I borrow based on this? I got it all in order. So when Steve came along, so when I spoke to Steve and his team presented me with the properties, and both of the properties had been offered to other potential buyers, but given the timing, people couldn't get their loan approvals within the 6 weeks like they used to. Remember that back in COVID, it was taking 3 months and more to get a loan. So they lost that deal. And then Anna came along, I had everything in place. So I was able to remove the subject to finance clause and just put in the subject to due diligence person property clause. And that's it. I was able to action really quickly and snap up those 2 deals.
And how much did the buyer's agent estimate you got it below market value or discount buy for those deals?
I can't remember how much I got it below market value. I don't think the use of a buyer's agent is about getting a discount, Dan. The idea of getting it off market is to reduce your competition, right? Because it's competition that's going to drive up the price beyond what it should be. So it's not so much about getting a discount, but to get it at a fair price without competition inflating the price. So people need to understand the value of off-market, less competition. That's what off-market means, right? Secondly, by doing the due diligence that they do, they have more intel than someone who is doing a desktop valuation and assessment is able to do. So for example, the one that was in Perth, there was a little bit of fear with the tenants because they had an independent cinema next to them, and that independent cinema was closing. So if you were doing a desktop deal or just a drive-by, you see that potentially, you know, restaurants during COVID wasn't going to do well. The cinema is closing down as well. You know, this is going to be not a very good deal to enter. But the buyer's agents were able to find out that, don't worry, this independent cinema is moving out, but Hoyts has signed to move in.
Yeah,
right?
definitely. Yeah, I think due
Yeah.
diligence can take a lot of time, and I think I've read Steve's book as well, and you know, if you get it wrong, especially for commercial, it could be disastrous. And I think commercial definitely more than most residential due diligence is so important. And yeah, you're good on you for getting, you know, finances in order and taking action when other people couldn't. And you know, I'm sure those two would have gone up heaps, since 2020.
Yeah. But Dan, even back to your question about, you know, if anyone or any doctor would like to look into property and want to go into, you know, and start with resi, you know, at what point, you know, should the trigger be to go into commercial? Well, the commercial game is completely different. You know, the borrowing capacity and the LVR is different. And then depending on what tax structure you buy it under, that then determines the borrowing capacity once again. So it's a matter of knowing, well, at which stage in your financial life can you afford resi versus commercial? And at the early stage, maybe, you know, it's more ideal to go into resi because of the leverage, you know, because of the 90 to 95% no LMI, and you can get a few more properties than you would with commercial. And then later on, as your income gets to a level where you really can afford to buy something at a lower LVR, then explore it.
Yeah, I think I don't know too many junior doctors who've got, you know, heaps of 30% deposits lying around, especially if, say, the commercial is valued, say, 2 million. So, you know, 30% 700K, and then you got stamp duty and buyer's agent and closing costs.
That's right.
And yeah, I think that's one of my philosophies at the moment is I think, commercial, the cash flow looks very good, but then a part of that is because you put in a big deposit to start
Yes.
with. And then obviously you need to be able to have had that cash or equity from somewhere, whether it be an inheritance or whether it be from selling off some residential properties. Um, and yeah, one thing with your resis that you said a positive cash flow 5K. Obviously at the moment we're in a high interest rate environment as of mid 2024.
Said that, my returns on my resi was only 6 grand. Obviously that was like 10, 20 years ago.
Yes.
So between our episodes, I went back to have a look and I saw, I should correct the numbers.
Yes.
They're netting, between 23 to 33 $1,000 per annum. So
Yeah.
anyway, not 6K, not wonderful, but not 6K. So
Yeah.
sorry about the math.
So these resi, roughly how much would they be worth now? Like 1 million or?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I
Okay.
purchased them all under, like, I had a budget of no more than
Mm.
500,000. So they were all purchased 500 or much less. And yeah, they're worth $1 million or more now.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So after paying interest, property management, land tax, etc., you get about 20K.
20 to 30, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Very good. Good.
Yeah.
And then also, what about how about we contrast that with your commercial properties?
So with the commercial properties, so the one that I purchased, so let's just talk in terms of value. If I purchased my resi at say 400 to 500 and I'm netting say 30,000, then with the commercial, so the one that I purchased for $1.7 million, I get over $100,000
Wow.
per annum income. That's net. And the one that I purchased for 2 million, I get around 135 plus $1,000 per annum net.
Yeah, so that just shows you the difference in terms of the cash flow from commercial and
Yeah.
residential. We were talking about yeah, in the property journey, I guess both residential and commercial, like how did you go about selecting advisors? Did you have any good experiences, bad experiences as well, or maybe not yourself, maybe colleagues or other doctors or health professionals that you've spoken to as well?
Yeah. Look, whether I got good advice or bad advice is all very dependent on me at the end of the day, because I make the decision to
Mm.
agree or not agree at the end of the day, right? But in terms of so the good decisions have been the kind of portfolio that I've discussed with you. The bad ones, and and I'll have some people disagree about off the plan and apartments, because I know of people who've done very well with off the plan apartments in the Gold Coast and surrounds. But in my situation, my off the plan apartments in Queensland and Perth, they're in blue chip suburbs. They've always been tenanted 100% of the time. The rent continues to go up with every rental review, but I've had zero capital growth on my apartments. And that's because there's no land value in it. It's surrounded by, a gazillion other apartments in the area, even though they're all very lovely and well presented. I've just not had any capital growth. So back to my philosophy of, I won't compromise one to get the other. I wouldn't choose the same type of properties again, because although I had good tenancy and cash flow, there is no capital growth in it.
Mm. And I guess also as well, I think timing does come into it as well. I was just curious, your Queensland one and your Perth one apartment, when did you buy those?
Yeah, around 7 to 10 years ago.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
2016, 2017. Yeah. Yeah. So obviously, so for our listeners, obviously, Brisbane went through a big boom about 2003 to 8, and Perth kind of between 2004 and 7, and then kind of both of them kind of flat between about 2008 to about 2019. And with those apartments, like how did you choose them? Were they in a smaller complex, like block of 6, or were they like, high
Yeah,
rises block of 30,
yeah.
50, or
Yeah. So I went along to an information night recommended by my broker at the time, and they had these particular people had this 100-point checklist on how they source their apartments or their properties. So they were all very low density, blue chip, white collar suburbs, and it was all very impressive with the brochure, the glossy brochures, and the detailed information that they presented on the night, and that's how I walked away with pretty much one apartment, and then shortly after that, a second apartment.
Mm,
Mm.
mm.
Yeah.
And how many in the complex roughly in the ones you bought? Would you?
Uh, I'd say around no more than 12,
Oh, okay, right. So it's
like
more of a
very low
boutique,
density,
boutique.
very low
Yeah,
density.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Um,
No swimming pools,
oh, okay, yeah. Because I was going to say a
off,
lot of high rises, they've got gyms, pools, high strata
yeah,
costs, sinking fund,
no,
concrete
yeah,
cancer.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's kept to a minimum.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. Often, some people, and even myself, almost fell into the trap of buying a really terrible off the plan investment, and you can point fingers, but ultimately at the end of the day, as an investor yourself, you have to do your due diligence, take responsibility, and grow from that as well. Um,
Yeah.
so on a
And you
more
just learn from it,
yeah,
right? You learn, you kind of have time in yourself to observe the patterns and learn. It's like, oh, I may not do that again.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
On a more positive note, can you tell us your, biggest or most memorable investing success to date?
When it comes to property,
Where your property, yeah.
my Malua Bay property.
Yeah. Where is
Absolutely.
Malua Bay, by the way?
Malua Bay is 15 minutes south of Batemans Bay. So during COVID, like everyone else, you kind of start thinking about, there's got to be more to life than this. What if I die tomorrow? And if I don't, let's make the most out of it, blah, 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 blah. So you go through all this, self-evaluation and assessment and this journey. And so one of the things that I've always wanted was a holiday home. And I knew that holiday homes were a little bit overrated, et cetera, et cetera. But hey, it's COVID and I wanted a holiday home. So I looked in my backyard, and by that I meant within an hour's drive from where I am, which is down the Wollongong, Kiama, Gerringong, Jirowa region. And I stumbled upon a cliff top place with an old shack on it. And it was going on auction, and I had looked up propertyvalue.com, and on there it was kind of valued at around the $2 million mark. So I kind of thought, oh yeah, I can stretch myself and get this property. It went for $4 million. A knockdown place, cliff top, 1 hour, 1.5 from where I live, 4 million. So I could
Where was that? Was that Kaima or
Jirowa.
Jirowa? Okay.
It's beautiful, Jirowa. It's just before Berry.
Yes. Yeah.
So that then kind of that then piqued my interest regarding cliff top properties and beachside properties. So I started looking, and it was by chance that I had a very close friend who lived in Canberra, and in a phone call one night after work kind of said, so what are you up to? And he says, oh, I haven't told you, we just purchased a holiday home in Malua Bay. And it was like, where is Malua Bay? So Malua Bay and that South Coast region is where Canberrans go to holiday. And it may not be Malua Bay, it could be one of the other bays. It's a big coastal area. But so I went on real estate and domain.com and had a look, and there it was, this place on the cliff top that had been on for weeks and weeks and weeks, and obviously no one was interested in it because there was yellow police tape around it, not police tape, but yellow danger zone tape around it. So it was a no-go zone, so no one was interested. And it was being sold for like $1.2 million. That was the asking price. But it was the thing was, it was 4 hours away from me rather than 1 hour away. Anyway, I drove down. It was late evening. I got there just before sunset. I was sold on the view. It was just like the Gerald property, except it was 4 hours away and 1/4 the price. I was happy to forego 4 hours by being, because it was saving me $1 million per 1 hour of driving. So it's like, this is a steal, I'm getting it. And get it, I did. And within a year, people still don't know the South Coast very well. Everyone goes up to the Central Coast from Sydney. So really the South Coast is only visited by local people or by Canberrans, because they're 2 hours away. So anyway, so now I'm putting on the map, because I want everyone to be aware of it and to raise the capital value of the place. But raising it is. So what I bought for 1.2, you would be able to buy it at 1.2 now, even at its shitty shack stage. So I'm my third development. So I'm currently doing 2 developments, but that would be my third one, and that one will be a duplex. If nothing else, one of my children can have one each after I die. But yeah, while I'm still alive, it will be, I think it will be a great little money spinner as an Airbnb or holiday rental, as well as for personal use. Yeah.
So, okay, so the plan is to develop it and then Airbnb it out. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
perfect.
Yeah.
So I guess we've touched on, your personal philosophy about property investing, and I guess, what are your thoughts? Some people are heavy in the capital growth, some people more in the cash flow, some people are big believers in, blue chip capital cities, close to CBD grows more, while other people say, even regional, especially large regional grows as well. What is your philosophy, and how do you go about selecting properties?
Yeah, suppose for me, what's worked for me, I've always been governed by my own budget, so I'm quite realistic with that. I like regional because it's still affordable. I like regional because most of the time it hasn't, its up curve follows that of the central areas. And so often you can get in when it's still at the bottom or on the rise, but it hasn't peaked. I like, I can't remember what your questions were. I like cash flow.
Yeah, capital growth versus cash flow.
That's it. Cash flow or capital growth. Based on my personality, so to make use of capital growth, one has got to leverage it. And I'm not leveraging my properties. I hold, right? Number one, I hold. Number two, I don't cross-collateralize my properties so that there's no risk to one if one fails. So each one is a standalone. So if I'm buying a resi property and it has, say, $500,000 equity on it, and it's netting me $25,000 per annum, well, I'm only making $25,000 passive income, and I'm not doing anything with the 500 equity that's sitting there or more. So that's, I'm not using it in my favor. So I either reassess my strategy or I don't aim for capital growth. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So to retire, you need cash flow. Right? To retire, you need cash flow. And that's why I started looking at commercial property. So, I'm 48. If I wanted to retire by 50, I'd need a lot of resi to, let's say, net. I'd need 5 or so resis to net $100,000. But I can achieve it with one commercial property paid down.
So what's your plan moving forward? Like, are you as you said, some people call this like lazy equity, where you've got a property and you've got a lot of equity, but you can't use it, or you're not using it. And as you said, on paper, 500K or even more, $1 million, but you're only netting 20K. So you could argue, if you put that in the share market or ETF or even in a term deposit, that would be a higher return. Like, is your eventual aim to sell out of the resi properties altogether, or?
No, I don't think I'll sell. I've thought about selling the apartments because there's no capital growth in them, but I'd make nothing from it, given that the selling price would be the same as the purchase price, and then you take into account the selling costs, and so I would make a single thing. So while I can afford it, I'll keep it. But after my current construction projects are finished, one of the goals that I have would be to maybe acquire a retail shopping mall. Maybe it probably have to be regional, and it has to be interstate. I couldn't afford it in perhaps in Sydney. I'd probably have to talk to the broker, and I might have to pull on the equity of the residential properties. So yeah, I think in the next phase of life, I'm prepared to make the resi work a little bit harder. Yeah.
Yeah.
And like
I
I said,
guess
I'm ready to do that because the kids are older now, and I feel like they can withstand any risk that I take.
Yeah. And yeah, I guess there's pros and cons. Even me evaluating my own portfolio at the moment, it's yes, if you sell it, you've got capital gains. But obviously if you held more than 12 months, you get a 50% discount. And yes, there's some selling costs versus drawing out equity, you don't have to go through those costs. But I could imagine if you did tap the whole, 80% equity in your residential property, then your residential property is now, instead of positive cash flow, it's probably going to become a bit negative. So I guess that, there's pros and cons, and yeah, definitely talk to your.
It'll be slightly negative, but you're going to make it up in the commercial property.
Yeah.
And if the commercial property can pay itself completely over 10 years, then you're pretty up compared to a residential property that's completely paid off.
Yeah, that's a good point. And yeah, I think also, yeah, look, this could be one of the top areas where we may disagree a bit on, even, earlier on, listening to some of the older buyers agents and gurus, kind of buy and never sell. But I think listening to some of the younger investors and thinking about myself, with the lending environment being a bit more limited nowadays, it has made me personally just think about strategic exits and recycling debt and recycling equity and things like that. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely, Dan. If it has to suit your situation, right? If you've got a high LVR on a lot of properties in this current high interest rate environment, and you've got a property that's got great capital growth, then it makes sense that you may want to sell that property and help to pay down and reduce the LVR on all the other properties.
Or even on your owner occupier, obviously in Sydney, owner occupier mortgage quite sizable, and obviously interest rates in the last few years going from 2% to 6.5%. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And look, obviously if it's tough for doctors, I can only imagine how hard it is for people on lower incomes as well.
That's right.
So shifting gears, what do you think about buyer's agents? I think from your post and from what you talk about, overall a fan, do you have any tips for selecting a buyer's agent? And some people might be more hands-off or hands-on in that process, working with the buyer's agent. What are your experiences been?
I've had good experiences with my buyer's agents that I've used, so I don't have anything bad to say about them. I suppose in my experience, I've learned a couple of things. Sometimes you don't know about the integrity of the buyer's agent until you work with them, or you don't know about the integrity unless you know someone in the industry who knows them well and can tell you. So for example, things like, how do you know whether a buyer's agent, if they have a 100-point checklist, at what point do they accept that it's good enough to present to the buyer? Is it at 50%? Is it at 60%? Or does it have to be 80% before they'll present it? What I've valued in the buyer's agent that I've worked with has been, even at the day of signing the contract, they've had new intel and have stopped me from purchasing it. You know, and if I don't purchase, they don't get their fee. Yep, and that's happened twice. And so I really value the integrity of, and I'm going to say it's the policing team. So I'm loyal to them because of that. They don't compromise on the information and don't put emphasis on needing to get their fee at no cost. I've also learned, even though I may not have worked with a lot of buyer's agents, I've learned through the journey that, yeah, there are some buyer's agents that are really heavy on the ground and like to do the groundwork and understand the neighborhoods and the people really well. And then there are those who are very intellectual, who are very number driven and very theoretical. And they both have got their places. So long as the integrity is there, that's important. So I think going by recommendations of people who've worked with these people, I hear doctors concern themselves with fees, with the buyer's agency fees. To me, I've always made my money back, because they purchased the right property that's given me the capital growth or the yield at a much higher rate than I could have sourced on my own for that $20,000-$30,000 fee or whatever it is. So I doubt that I'd ever buy a commercial property without using a buyer's agent going forward. Yeah. Yeah.
On this podcast, we talk about the concept of financial health. Often professionals, busy doctors are very time poor to look after their finances, too busy going the extra mile for their patients, or, staying back, and often neglect their physical health, mental health, families, financial health. What are some good financial habits that you have implemented either from early on in your journey or maybe you've recently implemented?
So I'm a saver. I'm not austere with my saving, but I live within my means. My only splurge is on experiences. So I'm very experiential in nature. So I splurge on holidays. The amount that I spend on holidays, I can probably buy a nice car to drive in with, but I don't spend on cars, I spend on holidays. My children are teenagers and they have, after school work. I teach them, if Dev Raga teaches that you should pay yourself 20%, I teach my kids that they ought to be saving 80% while they don't have any bills. And then when they are an adult and have got responsibilities, financial responsibilities, then that can be 20%. But I see no reason why they need to spend more than 20% of their hard-earned cash right at this moment. And they're very good at keeping to that. I'd say that they probably spend less than that, or at least they don't spend more than 20% of what they make. So we spoke about how I aim to clear big debts every 10 years. I stay by that principle so that I can sleep. It probably drives my work ethic as well, because I feel the need to work. Number one, so that I don't get bored staying at home, but number two, it does help me with that debt reduction strategy of every 10 years. As the years go by, I'm still a novice, but I can see the trajectory in becoming a little bit more sophisticated with each 10-year cycle. And I think that's why I continue doing what I do. As you can tell, I don't look at my portfolio, I don't look at my numbers, nor, my wealth or network very closely. I live like I have always lived. It's no different to me. But it's the mental challenge that drives me, and it gives me a purpose, I suppose. My purpose in the early days was to make sure that I could provide for my children, and then it became so I don't die and leave them with debts for them to worry about. And now it's my purpose is to maybe mentor and advise and coach those in the early stages. Because if a GP and single mum can do it, so can you. In terms of the doctors spending, too much time on work and on their patients, I'd have to say that as doctors, most of us are very immersed in our profession. It consumes us and we allow it to consume us. And perhaps if we draw parallel in investing, if we're going to save 20% of our money and pay ourselves first, then maybe we need to conserve 20% of our energy to invest in ourselves and allow ourselves that time to exercise, reflect, diarize, and learn about something outside of medicine. And maybe investing and wealth creation is something that they ought to allow themselves to think about 20% of the time.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, you know, some doctors also fall into the trap of, you know, lifestyle creep, you know, kind of as the income goes up, the expenses go up as well. But yeah, I think one of my other episodes I talk about not just budgeting, but also setting your priorities. So yeah, for some people, if you get heaps of value from holidays, spending time with family, definitely should spend on that. But then I think it's that there's a lot of, you know, unconscious spending as well. You know, do you need, you know, brand new clothes every week or so? Do you really need to upgrade that car, you know, every year? And I think kind of, yeah, a lot of material possessions don't necessarily equate to happiness. But yeah, I think I agree with you, Anna, about experiences. Me, myself, recently have gone on, you know, a few more holidays, especially in the post-COVID environment.
And they'll be better clinicians if they have the peace of mind to know that they themselves and their families are going to be well taken care of, because the lay community really don't understand just how the financial hardship that doctors undergo as well, and often, you know, that they are suffering in silence. So we can help them, give them that kind of reduce that financial anxiety or get rid of it for them. They will be able to become better clinicians because they can really concentrate on doing their job well and doing it with a carefree mind.
But I think having a space where we can share our learnings, and that's right, you know, kind of financial difficulties has no boundaries. You know, just because you're a doctor does not mean you're immune from challenges, making poor investment decisions. And yeah, I think yeah, I think myself, I should probably post a bit more and contribute to the community as well after, you know, learning so much from fellow investors. Yeah, people can post anonymously is my understanding as well, especially for more sensitive topics.
Yeah. And I suppose so long as the community keeps all the information that they learn safe, and by that I mean I'm putting myself out there as an example, and I share so openly about myself and my numbers. That doesn't mean that I'm not feeling anxious about the tall poppy syndrome. I still worry that, you know, people will judge me one way or another, or gossip about me, or talk about me, or make judgments about me. I do worry about it. I seriously do. But I kind of figure if I don't, then other people won't feel won't be given that permission to share. And I will only do it as long as I feel safe to be able to do it, because I'm not doing it anonymously, right? Once again, leading by example here. I'm not doing it anonymously, and I'm doing it with the good intent of sharing, not to show off, but to inspire and to educate. So it really comes back to the community to keep me safe by being kind and being thoughtful, and in understanding that my intent is genuine. And so long as they make me feel safe, I'll continue sharing. But I think as soon as I feel unsafe, I'll probably crawl back into my shell and stop sharing.
Yeah.
Maybe
And
by then everyone's well educated anyway and superseded me and don't need to hear from me. But yeah.
And I really appreciate your honesty and openness talking about these topics. And yeah, you know, finances often is something that people don't talk about enough. You know, but it's not all there is to life, but I think it is a part of our life, and we can use finances to positive impact our communities around us, our families. So do you have any closing thoughts or piece of advice for our listeners, our doctors, you know, trying to get ahead and reach financial freedom?
I'd love to do a podcast with you on business ownership and entrepreneurship. I only say that because I've, you know, For 20 years, it was a dirty word in the medical industry, where I felt like I was, there was something wrong with me to be taught to be so driven and so ambitious. Entrepreneur didn't have a positive connotation to it. But I think times are changing, and it certainly has taken me further than if I wasn't entrepreneurial in my spirit, or if I didn't take on risks and embark in business. So maybe my take-home message is be brave to break the norm. Just because you're in an environment where there's a lot of noise that tells you that there is only one way to do something, it's not true. That's just one way. And I'm very reachable. So if people want to DM me within my abilities, I will respond to them. So I get lots of DMs on Messenger. I've got my own personal page on Facebook, it's Dr Anna Pham. I'm on LinkedIn. Yeah, just message me on any of those forums, and I usually get back to people. Yeah.
Yeah, that was last question, which is how people can reach out to you. Do you have a preferred way for people to reach out to you, or
If
preferred
people,
platform, or yeah?
oh yeah, I don't mind. I'm on LinkedIn a lot, and my professional page. So I've got two pages on Facebook. One's my personal page where there's a picture of me in casual gear with my two kids. Don't friend that page. I'm not on that page very much. The other one where I'm, it's just a portrait, a headshot of me, in a kind of a green dress. That's the one that I spend most of my time on, because I'm writing blogs and posting things on there. So I'll see the DMs that come through there. Same with LinkedIn. A lot of people DM me on LinkedIn as well. So I also respond to that as well. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming onto the show. I know our listeners will have gained valuable insights and tips. And yes, definitely we should have another episode, about entrepreneurship, business ownership, clinic, building a clinic, and so on.
That's it. I'd
No
love
worries.
to. Thank you so much, Dan. And you should be applauded for what you're doing for the medical profession as well. You're a leader in this space as well, Dan. And for someone so young as well, I could not have done what you're doing right now. So kudos to you, Dr. Dan.
No worries. And to our listeners, thanks again for tuning in to another episodes. Yeah, if you find value, please subscribe and share it, even to one friend who you think may benefit, as this will grow our community. So until next time.